What if the United States, the world's most powerful military, suddenly found itself under attack? Not by an enemy, but by its own allies? Imagine a world where NATO turns its guns toward the US itself. What happens when the alliance built to defend freedom becomes the one that threatens it? Today, we're diving into one of the most shocking scenarios ever imagined. What if NATO invaded the United States? It begins with a political fracture. Let's assume it's the year 2032. The US withdraws from NATO after decades of growing tension, trade wars with Europe, disputes over defense spending, and accusations of cyber espionage between Washington and Brussels. In response, NATO leadership, under European command, accuses the US of destabilizing the West. Sanctions are imposed, embassies are closed. And within months, a multinational military coalition is formed, officially called Operation Liberty Shield. Their mission: to neutralize American aggression and secure global stability. In reality, it's a full-scale invasion plan. Before we imagine the war, let's break down the balance of power. NATO's combined strength: around 3.5 million active troops, over 25,000 tanks, 20,000 combat aircraft, dozens of aircraft carriers and destroyers, nuclear capabilities from France, the UK, and Turkey. Now, compare that to the US alone. 1.4 million active troops, but backed by the largest defense budget in the world, over $800 billion. 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, 5,000 nuclear warheads, an unmatched cyber warfare capability, and a home field advantage. 330 million civilians, many armed and familiar terrain. This wouldn't be a war of numbers. It would be a war of logistics, geography, and technology. NATO launches its opening move, a massive cyber and electronic warfare assault. Within minutes, GPS satellites flicker. US communication grids crash. Power outages hit the East Coast. The internet slows to a crawl as European cyber teams flood American servers with malware. Then, the skies roar. Aerial squadrons from the UK, France, and Italy take off from bases in Iceland and the Azores, heading straight for the US eastern seaboard. The first targets? Norfolk Naval Base, New York, and Washington, D.C., but the U.S. isn't defenseless. NORAD detects the incoming strikes. Within minutes, F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning jets scramble from bases across Virginia and North Carolina. A brutal dogfight erupts over the Atlantic, modern stealth versus numbers. The result? Dozens of NATO aircraft down before they even cross the coast. The invasion just became a bloodbath. NATO's amphibious landing begins along the coastlines of New Jersey and Delaware, chosen for their proximity to major cities. British Royal Marines, French Foreign Legion units, and German mechanized divisions hit the beaches in what becomes the largest invasion attempt since D-Day. But there's a problem: American geography. Unlike Normandy, the U.S. coastline is heavily fortified, monitored by drones, satellites, and missile systems like Aegis and Patriot batteries. As NATO forces move inland, they face constant air bombardment, armed civilians, and National Guard resistance. Urban warfare erupts in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Newark, block by block. But the invaders make progress at a terrible cost. As news spreads, the American public mobilizes. Hundreds of thousands of armed citizens, militias, and reservists flood the roads heading east. Factories shift overnight from producing cars to manufacturing ammunition. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy begins Operation Iron Wave, a massive counteroffensive. From the Pacific, 2 carrier groups, led by the USS Gerald R. Ford, sail through the Panama Canal to strike NATO positions in the Atlantic. Europe, watching from across the ocean, begins to fracture. Germany and France start losing public support as anti-war protests explode across Berlin, Paris, and London. Countries like Hungary, Poland, and Turkey, all NATO members, start questioning the mission entirely. The alliance that was supposed to protect unity begins to crumble under its own weight. While battles rage on the ground, the real war moves upward into space. The U.S. Space Force activates its orbital defense network, targeting NATO communication satellites. In response, France deploys its Astérion-class orbital drones, launching anti-satellite weapons to blind U.S. surveillance. For the first time in history, the war extends beyond the atmosphere. Satellites explode in silent bursts of light, each one taking down vital communication systems for both sides. Within days, global air travel halts. Financial markets crash. The internet partially collapses. The world is plunged into an information blackout. By week 3, NATO's advance stalls. Supply chains stretch too thin. The Atlantic crossing becomes a nightmare. U.S. submarines sink dozens of NATO supply ships before they reach the coast. Meanwhile, U.S. forces begin counter-invasions, launching amphibious landings in Portugal and Iceland, cutting off NATO's northern command. American bombers strike airbases in Spain, France, and the UK, crippling air support. NATO leadership, now desperate, convenes an emergency meeting in Brussels. They consider the unthinkable, a limited nuclear strike to force you surrender. But Washington detects preparations. The U.S. issues a clear warning. Any nuclear launch against U.S. soil will result in total retaliatory destruction. The world holds its breath. Facing total annihilation, both sides begin back-channel talks through Switzerland and the United Nations. By now, more than 2 million lives have been lost. Major cities lie in ruins. The global economy collapses. Finally, under mounting civilian pressure, NATO's European members withdraw from the war effort. The remaining forces, mostly from the UK and Canada, retreat back across the Atlantic. The US, victorious but shattered, emerges as a wounded giant. The alliance that once defined the modern world lies in ashes. Months later, the world begins to rebuild. But nothing is the same. The European Union dissolves. NATO ceases to exist. The United States, isolated and scarred, faces global condemnation for its retaliatory actions. New alliances form. China, India, and Brazil create a new power bloc known as the Global Stability Pact. The old world order, born in 1949, officially ends. And humanity learns a terrifying lesson. Even the strongest alliances can turn into their own worst enemies when power, fear, and pride collide. If NATO ever invaded the United States, it wouldn't just be a war between nations. It would be the end of the modern global system, a self-inflicted collapse of civilization as we know it. Because in the end, the greatest threat to peace isn't an outside enemy. It's the moment when allies forget why they were allies in the first place. So, what do you think would happen if NATO invaded the United States? Would any side truly win, or would the world lose everything in the process? Let us know your thoughts below. And remember, history may be written by victors, but what if tells the stories of the survivors?